Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We were just going through the general outlines of the Korean crisis on the one side. This is the kind of bloody, futile circus which is staged periodically. The Chonan war vessel of South Korea being sunk this past March raised the question who did it. And the international community, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, among others, and Russian experts who were sent in to investigate, they are not convinced that the Chonan incident was done by North Korea. This might have been another own goal, another self-inflicted false flag attack by the U.S. and the South Koreans for political purposes. In those weeks and months, it might have had something to do with an attempt to gin up a crisis with North Korea to increase the fear and dependency of Japan on the United States, precisely at the time that the new Hatoyama government had then come in and was seeking to get these U.S. bases out of Okinawa, where they are much resented by the local population. So all of that is the background. The the crisis could be seen coming. The things that make it more severe now, on the one side, the succession question, the obvious need for military, aggressive, anti-imperialist legitimation by Kim Jong-un, who doesn't have very much of that, having gone to private school in Switzerland. So he may have some military opposition among the senior leaders of the People's Army of North Korea. And the other thing is the situation between the U.S. and China, which has been tense all during 2010, going back to the Dalai Lama visit, going back to the Google conflict with China, going back to the activities of Rebiha Kadir and her World Uyghur Forum in Chinese Turkestan in Xinjiang province. All of this going on, but the missile that came out of the ocean, apparently in the immediate Pacific coast area of the U.S., not far from Los Angeles in international waters. NATO, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Robert Ellsworth, says that this was a warning shot by the U.S. to other parties over in the Western Pacific. But we also have Wayne Madsen writing in various places that, according to his sources, this was a Chinese missile fired from a Chinese ballistic missile submarine operating in international waters. And in this case, the interpretation would be the United States has been meddling, as we've reported, meddling in the Yellow Sea. The Yellow Sea is the body of water between the Korean Peninsula and large parts of the Chinese mainland. It's pretty much where Beijing is located, a little bit inland. So that's a very sensitive area for China. So the Yellow Sea is an area where the U.S. is sending warships, and the response to this crisis is that the Obama regime says they're sending the battle group of the USS George Washington, the aircraft carrier, into the Yellow Sea, where China does not want it to be. So you see the response is to do something that's extremely unwelcome to North Korea, but also unwelcome to China. So that's the first thing that they do is got to do with the Yellow Sea. The other thing is that we got Hillary Clinton a couple of months ago going to a meeting of Asian countries saying that the U.S. from now on is going to get involved big time in the conflicts of the South China Sea, the Spratly Islands and related areas. These are islands that are claimed by a number of countries, by Vietnam, by China, by the Philippines, by the Republic of China on Taiwan, and others, which the Chinese regard now as a paramount sovereign interest. And there is a backlash from other states in the region against China because of this claim, which some of them see as being extravagant. So this is the background, and therefore it might have been, according to Wayne Madsen and his array of sources. Again, this is the other competing story in this situation, a new type of Chinese ballistic missile firing submarine, which the Chinese apparently have one or two of. the missile supposedly a JL-2 ICBM. Again, this notion of ICBMs being fired from submarines, I think, is problematic because these are two things that don't necessarily go together. The idea of having a ballistic missile submarine is obviously that it's going to be closer to the target than it would be if it were a land-based ICBM back in your country. So obviously, great deal of acrimony, tensions between the U.S. and China. In 2002, Madsen reminds us, Condoleezza Rice got into a public kerfuffle with Chinese General Seung Guan-kai, Deputy Chief of Staff of Intelligence for the People's Liberation Army, who had said in 1995 that China could use nuclear weapons to attack Los Angeles. So those are the two stories. Now, I don't know the answer to this, whether it's a U.S. warning to China or a Chinese warning to the U.S. But either way, this is not good. Either way, it does seem that this was some kind of a ballistic missile and near Los Angeles, and that is not going to be good. So what's the answer? Look, with Obama, we're getting more wars, more hotspots, and more international crises than we did even with Bush the Younger. So I think it's obviously clear to change the dynamic of these things. One of the most essential, or the most essential thing, dump Obama, dump Hillary Clinton, by all means. Get rid of this bankrupt foreign policy establishment that does these things. And if you happen to be listening to the Diana Rehm show on National Public Radio on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you heard a very erudite discussion of the entire crisis from a whole group of think tankers from all kinds of institutes in Washington, D.C. and related places. And none of them is willing to even entertain the possibility that this was a provocation by the U.S., that the entire thing was staged by the U.S., despite the chain of these events going back to the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. So the general idea seems to be that given the fact that these circuses have occurred before in similar form, this may simply be another one, and it will take its place as just a localized incident. I guess we'll know that in the next week or so. At least we'll have an initial reading. The one thing that I would say is, on this National Public Radio discussion, what you can hear is now that North Korea is much weaker than it was in the 1980s in terms of economics, food, the structure of society. Lots and lots of Koreans have apparently, from the north, have been into China. So they see that even in an allegedly communist country, things don't have to be quite so poverty-stricken. And that, therefore, there's a possibility of subversion. You're hearing two things. One is that the possibility of the reunification of Korea is now more likely. And it would be a U.S.-dominated unification of the two Koreas. And the one thing that they said then, of course, is the U.S. would make a pledge that the U.S. troops would not go north of the current border, the 43rd parallel, between South Korea and North Korea. They'd stay in the south. Well, we know that we were told in 1990, 91, 92 that U.S. forces would remain in the old NATO sphere, that they would never go into places like Romania, Bulgaria, or the Baltic states where there are now U.S. military forces. So nobody in his right mind is going to take that promise seriously. They're going to reject it. So there's, on the one side, the idea that there may be subversion, right? The various Project Democracy groups, the Color Revolution people may be active in North Korea. It's possible. The other thing we're told by the neocons is, even if there is a war, it'll be over in 24 hours. There'll be a very brutal bombardment of Seoul, South Korea, by the 10,000 artillery pieces that the North Koreans have along the border. But then after that, they'll all be bombed to smithereens, and that will be the end of the war. A 24-hour war, a cakewalk. Don't believe it. Time to put an end to this policy of lunatic military adventurism. And the only way to do that is dump Obama. And remember that the Tea Party Republicans are big warmongers, just about all of them. So watch out for them, too. Happy Thanksgiving weekend to all, and we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.